The law enforcement subdual, restraint, and the neck compression was just more than Mr. Floyd could take.
It's striking how little we really know months later about how exactly George Floyd died. Well, you never hear anyone say it out loud. You're not allowed to say it out loud. But as a factual matter, we still don't know exactly how George Floyd died. We're still not precisely sure how George Floyd died. Why was George Floyd telling officers, "I can't breathe"? Well, here's one possible explanation. One of the primary symptoms of fentanyl overdose is, quote, slowed or stopped breathing. The story they told us about George Floyd's death was an utter lie. There was no physical evidence that George Floyd was murdered by a cop. The autopsy showed that George Floyd almost certainly died of a drug overdose, fentanyl. Dr. Baker concluded that George Floyd had so much methamphetamine and fentanyl in his system that if he had been found in his home, his death would have been ruled an open and shut overdose.
Do you recall telling the county attorney's office that had you found Mr. Floyd under different circumstances, you would have determined this to be a fentanyl overdose?
So I don't recall specifically what I told the county attorney, but it almost certainly went something like this. Had Mr. Floyd been home alone in his locked residence with no evidence of trauma, and the only autopsy finding was that fentanyl level, then yes, I would certify his death as due to fentanyl toxicity. Again, interpretation of drug concentrations is very context dependent. What I clarified for the U.S. Attorney and the Federal Bureau of Investigation was my opinion as to what happened to Mr. Floyd, and that is he experienced a cardiopulmonary arrest in the context of law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression. It was the stress of that interaction that tipped him over the edge given his underlying heart disease and his toxicological status.